Chapter 9 of Jekyll and Hyde. Dr. Lanyon's narrative. So this is kind of post-story. This is after the story, and kind of Dr. Lanyon's way that he saw everything from his perspective. On the 9th of January, now 4 days ago, I received by the evening delivery a registered envelope, addressed in the hand of my colleague and old school companion, Henry Jekyll. I was a good deal surprised for this, for we were by no means in the habit of correspondence. I had seen the man, dined with him, indeed, the night before, and could imagine nothing in our intercourse that would justify formality of registration. The contents increased my wonder, for this is how the letter ran. So basically all that says is Lanyon got a letter from Jekyll. 10th December of the 1800s. Dear Lanyon, you're one of my oldest friends, and although we may have differed at times on scientific questions, I cannot remember, at least on my side, any break in our affection. So we still like each other, we just don't agree. We're agreeing to disagree. There was never a day when, if you had said to me, Jekyll, my life, my honor, my reason depend on you, I would not have sacrificed my left hand to help you. Lanyon, my life, my honor, my reason are all at your mercy. If you fail me tonight, I am lost. You might suppose, after this preface, that I am going to ask you for something dishonorable to grant. Judge for yourself. So he's getting ready to ask a favor. He's kind of he's trying to preface his favor with, I know you might not agree with it, but please at least entertain this idea. I want you to postpone all other engagements for tonight. Even if you were summoned to the bedside of an emperor, to take a cab unless your carriage should be actually at the door, and with this letter in your hand for consultation, to drive straight to my house. Poole, my butler, has his orders. You will find him waiting at your arrival with a locksmith. The door of my cabinet is then to be forced, and you are to go in alone, to open the glazed press, letter E, on the left hand, breaking the lock if it be shut, and to draw out, with all its contents as they stand. So he's saying, go to my house, you're supposed to go into my office, you need to go to this drawer and get these things out. The fourth drawer from the top, or which is the same thing, the third from the bottom. In my extreme distress of mind, I have a morbid fear of misdirecting you. But even if I am in error, you must know the right drawer by its contents, some powders, a file, and a paper book. This drawer I beg of you to carry back with you to Cavendish Square exactly as it stands. This is the first part of the service. Now for the second. So this is still the letter from Jekyll to Lanyon. You should be back, if you set out at once on your receipt of this, long before midnight. But I will leave you that amount of margin, not only in the fear of those obstacles that can neither be prevented or foreseen, but because an hour when our servants are in bed is to be preferred for what will then remain to do. So he wants to meet him at midnight, because then everyone else will be sleeping. At midnight, then, I have to ask you to be alone in your consulting room, to admit with your own hand into the house a man who will present himself in my name, and to place in his hands the drawer that you will have brought with you from the cabinet. Then you will have played your part and earned my gratitude completely. 5 minutes afterwards you will insist upon an explanation, and you will have understood that these arrangements are of capital importance, that by the neglect of one of them, fantastic as they may appear, you may have charged your conscience with my death or shipwreck of my reason. He's basically saying here, if you don't help me, basically he's going to kill me. So if I don't have your help, this can't get done and I might die. And so if you say that to a friend of yours, your friend's probably likely to help you out, just based on the fact that they do still care about you to some extent, even if they don't agree with you. Confident as I am that you will not trifle with this, my heart sinks at the hand trembles at the bare thought of such a possibility. Think of me at this hour in a strange place, laboring under a blackness of distress that no fancy can exaggerate, and yet, well aware of that, you will but punctually serve me, my troubles will roll away like a story that is told. Serve me, my dear Lanyon, and save your friend H.J. So he's saying, please help me out. I need your help. Please don't judge me and just do this for me. P.S. I had already sealed this up when a fresh terror struck upon my soul. It is possible that the post office may fail me, and this letter not come into your hands until tomorrow morning. In that case, dear Lanyon, do my errand when it shall be the most convenient for you in the course of the day, and once more expect my messenger at midnight. It may then already be too late, and if that night passes without event, you will know that you have seen the last of Henry Jekyll. So if you don't see me, then that means I've probably died. And so upon this, Lanyon feels the need to react. Upon reading of this letter, I made sure my colleague was insane. But till that was proved beyond the possibility of doubt, I felt bound to do as he requested. The less I understood of this Fargo, the less I was in the position to judge of its importance. So he doesn't want, the less he knows, the less he needs to judge, and he just wants to do what he needs to do to help his friend and not get in any deeper than he needs to. And an appeal so worded could not be set aside without a grave responsibility. I rose accordingly from table, got into the hansom, which would be his cab, and then drove straight to, or his carriage rather, and drove straight to Jekyll's house. The butler was awaiting my arrival. He had received by the same post as mine a registered letter of instruction, and had sent out at once for a locksmith and a carpenter. The tradesmen came while we were yet speaking, and we moved in a body to the old Dr. Denham's surgical theatre, from which, as you are doubtless aware, Jekyll's private cabinet is most conveniently entered. The door was very strong, the lock excellent, and the carpenter avowed that he would have great trouble to have to do much damage if force were to be used, and the locksmith was near despair. But this last was a handy fellow, and after 2 hours of work the door stood open. The press marked E was unlocked, and I took out the drawer, had filled up with straw and tied a sheet, and returned it to Cavendish Square. So he went and did everything on the letter that he was asked to do. Here I proceeded to examine its contents. The powders were neatly enough made up, but not with the nicety of the dispensing chemist, so that it was plain that they were Jekyll's private manufacture. And when opened, one of the wrappers I found that seemed to me a simple crystalline salt of white color. The vial to which I next turned my attention might have been about half full of blood-red liquor, which was highly pungent to the sense of smell, and seemed to me a content of phosphorus and some volatile ether. At the other ingredients I could make no guess. The book was an ordinary version of the book, contained little but a series of dates. These covered a period of many years, but I observed that these entries ceased nearly a year ago, and quite abruptly. Here and there a brief remark was appended to a date, usually no more than a single word, double, occurring perhaps 6 times in a total of several hundred entries, and once very early in the list had followed several marks of exclamation, total failure. All this, though it whetted my curiosity, told me little that was definite. Here were a vial of some salt and the record of a series of experiments that had led, like too many of Jekyll's investigations, to no end of practical usefulness. How could the presence of these articles in my house affect either the honor, sanity, or life of my flighty colleague? So right now he pretty much thinks that Jekyll's kind of lost his marbles. If his messenger could go to one place, why could he not go to another? And even granting some impediment, why was this gentleman to be received by me in secret? The more I reflected, the more convinced I grew that I was dealing with a case of cerebral disease, meaning mental disease. And though I dismissed my servants to bed, I loaded on an old revolver that I might be found in some posture of self-defense. So he's kind of protecting himself because he's leery of what's happening. 12 o'clock, and scarce rung out over London. Ere the knocker sounded gently at the door, I went myself at that summons and found a small man crouching against the pillars of the portico. So who is that small man? Think about who we have in this book that's been kind of described as small and dwarf-like. Are you come from Dr. Jekyll? I asked. He told me yes by a constrained gesture, and when I had bidden him enter, he did not obey me without a searching backward glance into the darkness of the square, kind of leery, kind of waiting. So the guy who's at his doorstep is kind of waiting to, or looking behind him, kind of doesn't want to be caught off guard. There was a policeman not far off, advancing with his bull's eye open at the sight, though I thought my visitor started and made greater haste. These particulars struck me, I confess, disagreeably, and as I followed him into the bright light of the consulting room, I kept my hand ready on my weapon. Here at last I had a chance of clearly seeing him. I had never set eyes on him before, so much as I was certain. He was small, as I have said. I was struck, besides, with the shocking expression of his face, with this remarkable combination of great muscular activity and great apparent debility of constitution, and last but not least, with the odd subjective disturbance caused by his neighborhood. This bore some resemblance to incipient rigor, and was accompanied by a marked sinking of the pulse. At the time, I set down to some idiosyncratic personal distaste, and merely wondered at the acuteness of the symptoms. So all that's happened is Hyde, who was at Lanyon's door, has come into his office, or his great room, or whatever, followed him in, and now it's just Lanyon trying to figure out what this guy's all about and why is he here. But I have since had reason to believe the cause to lie much deeper in the nature of man, and to turn on some nobler hinge than the principle of hatred. This person, who has thus, from the first moment of his entrance, struck in me what I can only describe as a disgustful curiosity, was dressed in a fashion that you would have made an ordinary person laughable. His clothes, that is to say, although they were of rich and sober fabric, were enormously too large for him in every measurement. The trousers hanging on his legs and rolled up to keep them from the ground, the waist of the coat below his haunches, and the collar sprawling wide upon his shoulders. Strange to relate, this ludicrous accoutrement was far from moving me to laughter. Rather, there was something abnormal and misbegotten about the very essence of the creature now faced me. Something seizing, surprising, and revolting. This fresh disparity seemed but to fit in and to reinforce it, so that to my interest in the man's nature and character there was added a curiosity as to his origin, his life, his fortune, and status in the world. These observations, though, have taken so great a space to be set down in, were yet the work of a few seconds. My visitor was indeed on fire with sombre excitement. "Have you got it?" he cried. "Have you got it?" And so lively was his impatience that he even laid upon his hand upon my arm and sought to shake me. I put him back, conscious at his touch of certain icy pang along my blood. "Come, sir," said I, "you forgot that I have not yet the pleasure of your acquaintance. Be seated, if you please." And I showed him an example, and sat down myself in customary seat, with as fair an imitation of my ordinary manner to be patient, as the lateness of the hour, the nature of my preoccupations, and the horror that I had my visitor would suffer me to my muster. "I beg your pardon, Dr. Lanyon," he replied civilly enough. "What you say is very well founded, and my impatience has shown its heels to my politeness. I come here in the instance of your colleague, Dr. Henry Jekyll, on a piece of business of some moment, and I understood—" and he paused, and put his hand to his throat, and I could see, in spite of his collected manner, he was wrestling against the approaches of the hysteria. "I understood a drawer—" But here took pity on my visitor's suspense, and some perhaps on my own growing curiosity. "There it is, sir," and I pointing to the drawer, where it lay on the floor behind a table and still covered with the sheet. He sprang to it, and then paused, and laid his hand upon his heart. I could hear his teeth grate with the convulsive action of his jaws, and his face was so ghastly to see that I grew alarmed both for his life and reason. "Compose yourself," said I. He turned a dreadful smile to me, and as if with decision of despair, plucked away the sheet. At the sight of the contents he uttered one loud sob of such immense relief that I sat petrified, and the next moment, in a voice was already fairly well under control, "Have you a graduated glass?" he asked. I rose from my place with something of an effort, and gave him what he asked. He thanked me with a smiling nod, measured out a few minims of the red tincture, and added one of the powders. The mixture, which was first of a reddish hue, began in a proportion as the crystals melted, to brighten in colour, to evanesce the audibility, and to throw off small fumes of vapour. Suddenly, and at the same moment, the ebullition ceased, and the compound changed to a dark purple, which faded again more slowly to a watery green. My visitor, who had watched these metamorphoses with keen eyes, smiled, set down the glass upon the table, and then turned and looked upon me with an air of scrutiny. "And now, to settle what remains, will you be wise? Will you be guided? Will you suffer me to take this glass in my hand, and to go forth from your house without further parley, or as the greed of curiosity too much to command you? Think before you answer. It shall be done as you decide. As you decide, you shall be left as you were before, and neither richer nor wiser, unless a sense of service rendered to a man in mortal distress may be counted as a kind of riches to the soul. Or if you shall so prefer to choose, a new province of knowledge, and new avenues to fame and power shall be laid upon you here in this room upon the instant, and your sight shall be blasted by a prodigy to stagger an unbelief of Satan." So at this point, you're going to finish the last page, basically, page and a half. But he is watching Hyde. He has to decide if he wants to see Hyde take the potion and turn back to Jekyll, although he doesn't know that's what will happen. It's been left to Lanyon to decide this. So please complete chapter 9 on your own.